We all know someone who has forgotten how to feel, someone who has built walls so high that love can't find its way in. Vincent Darnell was that man, a contractor who had spent 30 years tearing down everything beautiful in his path. When the small church in Millbrook refused to sell their property, Vincent got drunk and did something unthinkable. He kicked over their statue of the Virgin Mary, breaking it into pieces. The townspeople were angry, but Vincent had seen anger before. What he hadn't expected was what happened next. In 24 hours, his world began falling apart. His phone died. His business deals collapsed, and his estranged daughter sent him a photo from inside that same church, the pew where his late wife used to pray. But what could possibly break a man who had spent decades breaking everything else? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vincent Darnell's morning began, like every other morning for the past 15 years, with the deliberate routine of a man who had trained himself not to think. The sterile penthouse apartment held no photographs, no mementos, no evidence that Vincent Darnell had ever loved anything or anyone. But it hadn't always been this way. 30 years ago, Vincent had been a different man entirely, young, idealistic, and burning with passion to reshape the world with beauty. It was at the Millbrook Community Church that he first met Catherine, a young woman with auburn hair and eyes that held all the warmth the world had to offer. She had been volunteering with the renovation committee when Vincent was hired to design the renovation, his first major project. "This sanctuary has been here for over a century," she had said, running her hand along the worn wooden pews. 5 generations of families have been married here, baptized here, buried from here. Can you feel it? And Vincent could feel it. Standing in that quiet space with Catherine beside him, he could feel the weight of all those prayers, all those joys and sorrows offered up within these walls. He understood then that architecture wasn't just about creating shelter. It was about creating sanctuaries for the human soul. Their courtship was built on long conversations about faith and beauty, about the role of art in serving something greater than itself. Catherine worked as a teacher, but her true calling was in creating spaces where people could find healing and hope. Together they dreamed of a practice specializing in community buildings, churches, schools, libraries, structures that would serve the common good rather than private profit. They were married in the Millbrook church on a spring morning when the dogwoods were in bloom. Their daughter Grace was born 2 years later, and Vincent threw himself into designing their first home with the same passion he brought to his public: buildings. For 7 perfect years, Vincent lived in a world where love was not just possible, but inevitable. Then Catherine started getting tired. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in October. Stage 3 ovarian cancer, already metastasized. The next 2 years were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Through it all, Catherine never lost her faith. She continued attending church when able, continued praying with a fervor that both amazed and frustrated. "Vincent, I don't understand how you can keep believing," he said to her one night in her hospital room. Catherine turned to look at him, her face gaunt, but her eyes still bright. "Faith isn't about understanding," she said. "It's about trusting that there's meaning in things we can't see yet." But Vincent couldn't see any meaning in watching the woman he loved suffer. He began to rage against a God who would create such beauty only to destroy it. Catherine died on a Sunday morning in February, with snow falling outside the hospital window. Her last words were directed at Vincent, spoken in a whisper: "Keep building beautiful things. Promise me you'll keep building beautiful things." He had promised, holding her hand as it grew cold. But even as he spoke the words, he felt something fundamental breaking inside him. After the funeral, as he stood beside Catherine's grave, Vincent made a decision. If this was how the world worked, if goodness was punished and beauty was temporary, then he would stop trying to create and start taking what he could get. The change didn't happen overnight, but months turned into years, and Vincent found that it was easier to live without hope than to risk having it destroyed again. Grace grew up and gradually stopped trying to reach the father who had disappeared. Behind a wall of work and routine, his work became his identity. He bought out his former employer, built his own company, and systematically began acquiring and demolishing the kind of community spaces he had once lovingly created. Churches became shopping centers, libraries became condominiums, schools became office parks. But late at night, alone in his penthouse apartment, Vincent sometimes opened the desk drawer where he kept the one remnant of his former life, Catherine's wedding ring. He would hold the ring, remembering the promises they had, made to each other in that candlelit sanctuary. And for just a moment, he would feel the echo of the person he had been. Someone who believed in love, in beauty, in the possibility of creating something lasting and meaningful. Then he would close the drawer, return to his reports and contracts, and continue the work of tearing down everything that reminded him of what he had lost. Now, 30 years later, the Millbrook Community Church had become his latest target. The church's refusal to sell had surprised him. The elderly pastor had politely but firmly declined every offer. "This isn't about money, Mr. Darnell," the pastor had said. "This building has been the heart of our community for over a century. Some things can't be replaced, regardless of price." Vincent had left that meeting with familiar frustration and contempt. These people were clinging to the past, refusing to acknowledge reality. As he sat in his office that evening, touching Catherine's ring through the closed drawer, Vincent made a decision. If the church wouldn't sell willingly, he would find other ways to acquire the property. He didn't yet know that in 24 hours, everything he thought he understood about power and control would be shattered as completely as the statue he was about to destroy. Vincent stared at the image, the same wooden pew where he and Catherine had sat on their wedding day, where they had prayed together during her illness, where he had last seen her take communion. Grace was sitting in that exact spot, her hands folded in the same way Catherine used to fold hers. His daughter had found her way to the very sanctuary he had tried to destroy. Vincent set down his phone and walked to his desk, pulling open the drawer where Catherine's wedding ring waited in its small velvet box. As he held it up to the light, he could swear he heard the distant sound of church bells, though no churches. In the city rang their bells at midnight. Something had cracked open inside him, and Vincent Darnell was no longer certain he could hold back whatever was trying to escape. Vincent woke to the sound of silence. No phone buzzing, no emails chiming, no familiar hum of the city 20 floors below. His phone remained dead despite being plugged in all night, its screen as black and unresponsive as his own reflection in the bathroom mirror. The elevator in his building was out of order, forcing him to take the stairs down to the parking garage. By the time he reached his car, Vincent was breathing hard and feeling every one of his 52 years. When had climbing become so difficult? When had his own body become such a stranger? His first stop was the office, where his assistant Marcus waited with a stack of messages and an expression Vincent had never seen before: pity mixed with professional concern. 3 more contracts were terminated overnight, Marcus reported, consulting his tablet with the efficiency that had made him invaluable for the past 8 years. The Morrison Plaza project, the Riverwalk development, and the Centennial Shopping Center all cited breach of unspecified terms. Vincent studied the cancellation letters, looking for patterns or explanations. The legal language was deliberately vague, but the message was clear. Nobody wanted to do business with Darnell Development anymore. "Get Thomas Webb on the phone," Vincent ordered. "I need to know what's happening." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, I've been trying to reach Mr. Webb since yesterday. His office says he's unavailable, and his cell phone goes straight to voicemail." The morning deteriorated from there. Vincent's banker was in meetings. His insurance company was conducting an audit. His contractors were reporting equipment failures and permit delays. It was as though some invisible force was systematically dismantling everything he'd built. Desperate for distraction, Vincent drove home and began searching through storage boxes he hadn't opened in years. Catherine's belongings were packed away. In his bedroom closet, 30 boxes of memories he'd been unable to throw away but couldn't bear to examine. The first box contained her teaching supplies, lesson plans, children's artwork, thank you cards from parents. Vincent found himself reading through evaluations written by her principal. Catherine brings joy and compassion to every interaction with her students. She has a gift for making each child feel valued and capable. The second box held photo albums from their early marriage. Vincent and Catherine at various construction sites, consulting over blueprints, celebrating groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. In every picture, they looked genuinely happy, united in their shared vision of creating beautiful spaces for communities to flourish. The third box contained Catherine's prayer journal. Vincent hesitated before opening the leather-bound book. Catherine had written in it faithfully for years, but he'd never read it, respecting her privacy even in grief. Now, with trembling fingers, he turned to a random page dated 2 months after her diagnosis. The doctors say the treatment isn't working as well as they hoped. Vincent is trying to hide how scared he is, but I can see it in the way he holds my hand, like he's afraid I'll disappear if he lets go. I pray that whatever happens, he won't lose his faith in goodness. He has such a gift for creating beauty. But I'm afraid my illness is teaching him to see only destruction. Vincent's hands shook as he turned the pages. Entry after entry revealed Catherine's deep concern, not for her own suffering, but for the man she was leaving behind. Vincent thinks I don't notice how angry he's becoming at God. He sits in the hospital chapel sometimes, but I can see the rage in his shoulders. He's forgetting that faith isn't about getting what we want. It's about trusting in love, even when we can't understand the plan. Tears blurred Vincent's vision as he read her hopes for their daughter, her prayers for Vincent's healing, her unwavering belief that love was stronger than loss. On a page dated just 3 weeks before her death, she had written, "I know Vincent will try to harden his heart when I'm gone. He'll think it's easier to feel nothing than to risk being hurt again. But I also know that the man who designed our church renovation, who held our baby daughter like she was made of starlight, who cried at our wedding because he was so grateful for love, that man is still in there. Someday he'll find his way back to beauty. I have to believe that." Vincent closed the journal and walked to his window, staring out at the city he'd helped reshape with concrete and commerce. Every building in his sightline represented a choice: to prioritize profit over people, efficiency over beauty, development over preservation. Catherine had been right. He'd spent 30 years trying to feel nothing, and he'd nearly succeeded. His reflection in the window showed a man who looked successful but empty, powerful but alone. When had he become someone Catherine wouldn't recognize? The doorbell interrupted his brooding. Vincent wasn't expecting anyone, and his doorman usually announced visitors. When he opened the door, he found a young woman in a FedEx uniform holding an overnight envelope. Vincent Darnell. He signed for the package and noticed the return address, Morrison and Associates law firm. His stomach dropped as he tore it open and found a community petition with hundreds of signatures opposing the destruction of the Millbrook church. But it wasn't the petition itself that stopped Vincent's breathing. It was one particular signature, written in handwriting he would recognize anywhere. Catherine Darnell, dated 15 years ago during a previous fundraising campaign. Vincent traced her signature with his finger, remembering how she used to practice, writing Mrs. Catherine Darnell before their wedding, giggling like a teenager as she filled page after page with variations of her soon-to-be name. Here was proof that even years after his transformation into a destroyer of communities, Catherine had still believed in preserving sacred spaces. The irony was almost unbearable. While he was out dismantling the very type of buildings they'd once lovingly restored together, she had continued supporting them, quietly signing petitions and making donations to causes he now opposed. Vincent's phone buzzed. The first sign of life it had shown in 24 hours. The screen displayed a single text from Grace. "Dad, we need to talk." He called her immediately, and she answered on the first ring. "Grace, honey, I got your text. About the church. I saw the news." "Dad." Her voice was carefully controlled, the way it got when she was trying not to cry. "About the statue. People are saying you destroyed it." Vincent closed his eyes. "It's complicated." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting it looks pretty simple. Mom loved that church, and you attacked it. Your mother is gone, Grace. She's been gone for 15 years. No, Dad, you've been gone for 15 years. Mom has been with me every day, in every choice I make to build something instead of tear it down. She's in every act of kindness I choose over cynicism, every moment I choose to believe in love despite loss." Vincent's throat tightened. "Grace, I've been going to that church, Dad, sitting in Mom's pew, trying to understand what she found there. And you know what I discovered? Peace. The kind of peace you used to help people find when you designed beautiful spaces instead of destroying them." The call ended abruptly, leaving Vincent staring at his silent phone. His daughter had found what Catherine always promised was there: a sanctuary for healing, a community of support, a place where brokenness could be transformed into something whole, and he had tried to destroy it. Vincent drove to the cemetery for the first time in 5 years. Catherine's grave was overgrown with weeds, the headstone he'd chosen in his grief barely visible behind tall grass and volunteer trees. He knelt on the damp earth and began pulling weeds, his expensive suit getting dirty as he worked. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the marble stone. "I'm sorry I stopped coming. I'm sorry I became someone you wouldn't recognize. I'm sorry I forgot how to build beautiful things." As he worked, Vincent began to remember the man Catherine had loved, the idealistic architect who believed buildings could heal souls, who saw his work as a calling rather than just a career. That man had been buried here along with Catherine, but maybe it wasn't too late to resurrect him. The sun was setting as Vincent finished clearing the gravesite. Catherine's name now stood clear and proud on the headstone, along with the inscription, "He'd chosen in better days. She built beauty wherever she went." Driving home through the darkening streets, Vincent made a decision that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. Tomorrow, he would return to Millbrook, not as a destroyer, but as the architect Catherine had always believed he could be again. The man who had forgotten how to build beautiful things was ready to remember. The call came at dawn. Vincent's assistant Marcus, normally unflappable, sounded genuinely shaken as he delivered news that should have been impossible. Darnell Development's 3 largest investors had withdrawn their backing overnight, citing philosophical differences with the company's direction. "Sir, I've never seen anything like this," Marcus said. "It's as if they all coordinated, but there's no evidence of communication between them. And the timing, it's all happening exactly 24 hours after I destroyed the statue," Vincent finished. He was standing at his window, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber that reminded him of Catherine's hair. "I didn't say that, sir." "But you thought it." Vincent could hear Marcus shuffling papers, probably calculating how much longer the company could survive this financial hemorrhaging. "How bad is it? Without the backing, we can't meet payroll next month. The insurance policies will lapse, the office lease will default, and the contractors will file liens on our current projects." Vincent had built his empire over 3 decades, and it was dissolving in 3 days. Any rational businessman would be panicking, calling emergency meetings, demanding explanations. Instead, Vincent felt something he hadn't experienced in years: relief. After hanging up with Marcus, Vincent drove across town to his company's headquarters. The building was one of his first major acquisitions, a converted Victorian mansion that he'd gutted and transformed into sleek office space. As he pulled into the parking lot, Vincent noticed something he'd never seen before: The building was ugly, stripped of its original architectural details, painted in corporate grey, and surrounded by asphalt where gardens had once bloomed. The structure represented everything wrong with his approach to development. He'd taken something with character and history and turned it into a sterile monument to efficiency. Inside, Vincent found Marcus organizing files with the methodical precision of a man preparing for closure. The younger man looked up as Vincent entered, and for the first time in 8 years, his professional composure cracked. "Mr. Darnell, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you having some kind of breakdown?" Vincent considered the question seriously. Was he having a breakdown, or was he finally breaking free? "Marcus, how long have you worked for me?" 8 years, sir. "And in those 8 years, have you ever seen me create anything beautiful?" Marcus looked confused. "Sir, you've created a very successful business." "That's not what I asked." Vincent sat down across from his assistant, studying the young man's earnest face. "When you drive through the communities where we've built shopping centers and office parks, do you feel proud? Do you think we've made the world more beautiful?" That's not really how I think about business, sir." "Maybe it should be." Vincent opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder he'd brought from home. "I want to show you something." The folder contained architectural drawings from 30 years ago, Vincent's original plans for the Millbrook church renovation. As he spread them across the conference table, Vincent watched Marcus's expression change from confusion to wonder. "You drew these?" "A lifetime ago." Vincent traced the intricate details he'd sketched with such hope and passion. "This was my vision for expanding the sanctuary while preserving every original element. Look at these notes. I wanted to create heaven on earth for the congregation." Marcus studied the drawings with the intensity of someone discovering a hidden masterpiece. "These are incredible. The way you've integrated the old with the new, the attention to light and acoustics. This is artwork, not just architecture. It was supposed to be my gift to the community." To Catherine, Vincent's voice caught slightly. "We were going to donate the design work, spend our honeymoon supervising the construction. But then she got sick, and you never built it." "I never built anything like it again." Vincent gathered the drawings carefully. "After Catherine died, I convinced myself that beauty was naive, that communities were obstacles to progress, that the only honest approach to business was ruthless efficiency." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this revelation about his employer. "Is that what's happening now? With the statue, the failed contracts, the investors pulling out? Are you trying to go back to this?" Vincent considered the question. Was that what was happening? Was some cosmic force pushing him back toward his original calling? "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I can't keep doing what I've been doing. I can't keep tearing down the kind of places Catherine loved, the kind of spaces where people find hope and community." "So what happens to the company? To the employees? To me?" Vincent had been dreading this conversation, but he owed Marcus honesty. "The company is finished. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know you've been loyal, and I'm sorry you're paying the price for my crisis of conscience." To Vincent's surprise, Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Vincent had seen from him in years. "Can I tell you something, Mr. Darnell? I became an architect because I wanted to create beautiful spaces that would inspire people. When I took this job, I thought I'd learn about the business side while working on projects that mattered. But in 8 years, I've never designed anything I was proud of. I've helped you destroy more beautiful buildings than I've helped create." Vincent studied his assistant with new eyes. "Why did you stay?" "Because I kept hoping you'd remember what you used to be. My architecture professor showed us your church designs from the 80s before I knew I'd be working for you. He said you were one of the most promising sacred space designers of your generation. I used to wonder what happened to that vision." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two architects who had lost their way, finding each other in the ruins of a business built on destruction. "Marcus, what would you say if I told you I was thinking about returning to Millbrook? Not To tear down the church, but to complete the renovation I started 30 years ago. Marcus's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm Vincent hadn't seen in years. I'd say that sounds like the most meaningful project either of us has ever worked on. Vincent's phone buzzed with another message from Grace. This time it was a longer text. Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Mum used to tell me stories about the church renovation you designed when I was little. She said it was your masterpiece, the project that showed her the man you really were. She kept the original drawings in her hope chest. I think she always believed you'd finish it someday. Maybe it's time. Attached to the message was a photo of Grace sitting in the Millbrook sanctuary, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows Vincent had specified decades ago. She looked so much like Catherine in that light that Vincent's breath caught in his throat. Change of plans, Vincent announced suddenly. We're not closing the business, we're transforming it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Into what? Into what it should have been from the beginning. A firm that specializes in preservation and restoration, in creating spaces that serve communities instead of destroying them. Vincent felt energy returning to his voice for the first time in years. And our first project is going to be completing the Millbrook church renovation. Sir, with respect, we have no money, no investors, and no contracts. How exactly are we going to fund a major restoration project? Vincent opened his wallet and pulled out Catherine's wedding ring, which he'd been carrying since finding it, in his desk drawer. This ring cost me 3 months' salary when I bought it 30 years ago. It's probably worth 10 times that now. He held the simple gold band up to the light, remembering how it had looked on Catherine's finger. But more importantly, it represents a promise I made to keep building beautiful things. I think it's time to honor that promise. Marcus stared at his employer as if seeing him for the first time. You're really going to do this? You're going to risk everything to restore a church in a small town that probably hates you right now? Not restore, Vincent corrected. Complete. I'm going to finish what Catherine and I started 30 years ago. I'm going to build something beautiful in a world that desperately needs more beauty. As they began making plans for the most important project of Vincent's life, neither man noticed that the sun had broken through the clouds outside, flooding their sterile office with the kind of golden light that transforms ordinary spaces into something sacred. Vincent's isolation deepened as word of his business collapse spread through professional circles. Former associates crossed streets to avoid him. Contractors who had once competed for his projects now returned his calls with polite excuses. The architectural community that had once feared his ruthless efficiency now whispered about his apparent nervous breakdown. His penthouse apartment felt like a tomb. The sterile surfaces that had once represented success now seemed to mock his loneliness. Vincent found himself searching through old coat pockets, looking for something, anything, that might connect him to the man he used to be. In the pocket of a wool overcoat he hadn't worn in years, his fingers closed around something small and familiar, Catherine's silver cross necklace. Vincent stared at the delicate chain, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Catherine had worn this cross every day of their marriage, touching it absently when she was nervous or deep in thought. During her illness, it had become a source of visible comfort. Her fingers would find it during chemotherapy sessions, during doctor consultations, during those long nights when pain made sleep impossible. On the last day of her life, as Vincent held her hand in the hospital room, Catherine had pressed the necklace into his palm. "Keep this," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of machines. "Not to remember my death, but to remember my faith. Someday you might need to borrow it until you find your own again." Vincent had carried the cross in his pocket to her funeral, intending to bury it with her. But at the last moment, he had kept it. The only piece of her faith he couldn't bring himself to surrender to the earth. For 30 years, it had traveled. With him, forgotten in coat pockets and desk drawers, a talisman of beliefs he'd abandoned but couldn't quite destroy. Now, holding it in the afternoon light streaming through his windows, Vincent felt the weight of more than silver. This small symbol had sustained Catherine through her darkest hours. It had given her peace when medicine failed, hope when doctors offered none, strength when her body betrayed her. His phone rang, startling him from his reverie. Grace's name appeared on the screen. "Dad?" Her voice was softer than it had been in their recent conversations, but still cautious. "Grace, I'm glad you called. I've been thinking about what you said. I saw the news about your company. Are you all right?" Vincent looked around his empty apartment at the success he'd built on the foundation of other people's losses. "I'm not sure I know what all right means anymore. Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been going to Mom's church, the one in Millbrook, for the past 6 months. Ever since I started therapy to deal with my anger about losing her and losing you." The words hit Vincent like physical blows. "Grace, I never left. I was always—" "You left the day Mom died, Dad. Your body stuck around, but the father I knew, the one who built beautiful things and believed in love, that man disappeared." Grace's voice cracked slightly. "Do you know what the hardest part has been? It's not that I lost Mom to cancer. It's that I lost you to grief." Vincent closed his eyes, Catherine's cross warm in his palm. "I didn't know how to be anyone else. Without her, I didn't know how to keep believing in good things. But she did know. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I found something in Mom's papers when I was cleaning out her old things. Letters she wrote but never sent. Letters to you." Vincent's heart stopped. "What letters?" "Letters she wrote during her treatment, when she knew she was going to die but you weren't ready to hear it. Letters about her hopes for you, her fears about what you might become, her absolute certainty that you'd find your way back to building beautiful things. Grace, she wrote 1 letter for every year she expected to be gone. 15 letters, Dad. I've been reading them on her birthday each year, and they've been the only thing keeping me connected to you. Because in those letters, she talks about the man you really are, not the man you've been pretending to be." Vincent felt tears he'd been holding back for decades beginning to fall. "What do they say?" "They say that losing her would be the hardest thing you'd ever face, but that your gift for creating beauty was stronger than your capacity for destruction. They say that someday you'd remember that buildings aren't just structures, they're promises to communities about what's possible. They say that when you finally came back to yourself, you'd do something extraordinary." Vincent looked out his window at the city he'd helped shape, seeing it now through Catherine's eyes. Every harsh angle, every graceless surface, every space, designed for efficiency rather than humanity, represented a choice to honor his grief over her memory. "Grace, I need to ask you something. Do you think she would forgive me for becoming someone she wouldn't recognize?" "Dad, she already did. That's what faith means. Forgiving people before they even know they need it." Grace paused. "But the question isn't whether Mom would forgive you. The question is whether you're ready to forgive yourself and become the man she always saw in you." After Grace hung up, Vincent sat in his apartment holding Catherine's cross and thinking about forgiveness. For 30 years, he'd punished himself for failing to save her, for being unable to protect the person he loved most from suffering and death. He'd convinced himself that if he couldn't create beauty without her, then he wouldn't create beauty at all. But what if Catherine's death wasn't a punishment to be endured, but a calling to be honored? What if the greatest tribute to her memory wasn't the preservation of his grief, but the restoration of his gifts? Vincent walked to his computer and began researching restoration techniques for marble statuary. If he was going to return to Millbrook, he would not come empty-handed. The statue he'd destroyed in his rage would be the first thing he rebuilt. As he worked, Vincent felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in decades, anticipation for creating something beautiful. The feeling was fragile, like a candle flame in wind, but it was unmistakably real. Catherine's cross caught the last light of day as Vincent drafted his letter to Father Morrison. Tomorrow, he would drive to Millbrook, not as a destroyer, but as a penitent, carrying tools of restoration instead of instruments of demolition. The man who had forgotten how to build beautiful things was remembering, one broken piece at a time. And in his heart he could almost hear Catherine's voice, whispering the words that had sustained her through her darkest hours. Faith isn't about understanding. It's about trusting that there's meaning in things we can't see yet. Vincent was finally ready to trust in something he couldn't yet see, his own capacity for redemption. Vincent's assistant Marcus arrived at the abandoned office building, carrying a cardboard box and wearing an expression Vincent had never seen before. Hope mixed with nervous excitement. Inside the box were architectural plans that had been stored in the company archives for 3 decades. "I found them," Marcus announced, spreading the yellowed papers across Vincent's desk. "Your original renovation designs for the Millbrook church. They were filed under suspended projects and marked Personal V. Darnell." Vincent's hands trembled as he recognized his younger self's passionate handwriting covering the margins of the blueprints. Notes about natural light patterns, acoustical considerations, and preservation techniques filled every available space. This wasn't just a renovation plan, it was a love letter to sacred architecture. "Look at this detail work," Marcus said, pointing to intricate sketches of proposed stained glass modifications. "You weren't just preserving the existing structure, you were enhancing its spiritual impact while honoring its historical integrity." Vincent studied the plans with eyes that had spent 30 years forgetting what they once saw so clearly. His younger self had designed a renovation that would expand the sanctuary's capacity while maintaining its intimate character. New fellowship halls would provide community gathering space. Enhanced lighting would illuminate the altar without harsh artificiality. Every modification served both practical and spiritual purposes. "There's something else," Marcus continued, producing a folder marked Community Input. "You collected surveys from congregation members about their vision for the renovated space. Look at some of these responses." Vincent read through handwritten cards filled with hopes and dreams. Elderly parishioners wanted better accessibility. Young families requested childcare facilities. The choir hoped for improved acoustics. Everyone wanted the renovated church to serve the community more effectively while preserving its sacred character. One card stopped Vincent's breathing. Written in Catherine's careful script, "I hope the renovation will create spaces where people can find healing during their darkest hours. Sometimes we need architecture to hold us when we're too broken to hold ourselves." Marcus noticed Vincent's reaction. "Sir, these plans represent everything we've talked about. Architecture in service of community, beauty that serves a higher purpose. This isn't just a renovation project. This is your manifesto." Vincent's phone rang. Grace's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, I have news. I called Father Morrison and told him about your plans to restore the statue and complete the renovation." Vincent's stomach tightened. "What did he say?" "He said the congregation has been praying for this moment for 30 years. They never gave up hope that you'd return to finish what you started. They've even been setting aside money in a renovation fund just in case." Vincent felt the walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble. "Grace, I destroyed their statue. I came to their sacred space and vandalized it out of drunken rage. Why would they trust me now?" "Because Mom told them they should. Before she died, she met with the church board and made them promise that when you finally came back, and she insisted you would, they should welcome you home." The word home hit Vincent like lightning. For 30 years, he'd been wandering in a wilderness of his own making, convinced he'd lost the right to belong anywhere that celebrated beauty or community. But Catherine had never stopped believing he would find his way back to his calling. "There's more," Grace continued. "Father Morrison wants to meet with you tomorrow. He has something to show you, something Mom left for when you were ready." After hanging up, Vincent spread his renovation plans across the conference table and began updating them with 3 decades of additional experience and wisdom. His mature understanding of construction techniques, combined with his younger self's passion for sacred space, could create something extraordinary. Marcus worked beside him, contributing ideas for sustainable building practices and accessibility improvements that hadn't existed 30 years ago. Together, they refined the designs into something that honored both the church's history and its future needs. "Mr. Darnell," Marcus said as they worked late into the evening, "I need to ask you something. Are you sure about using the wedding ring to finance this project? That seems like an enormous sacrifice." Vincent looked up from the blueprint he was annotating. "Marcus, that ring represents the promises Catherine and I made to each other. One of those promises was to keep building beautiful things, to use our gifts in service of something greater than ourselves. Selling the ring to fund this project isn't a sacrifice. It's the fulfillment of a vow I've been breaking for 30 years. But what if we run out of money? What if the renovation costs more than we estimated? Then we'll figure it out. We'll apply for grants, organize fundraisers, partner with other craftsmen who believe in the project. The point isn't to maintain my financial security, it's to create something that will serve the community long after we're gone." Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "You know, this is the first time in 8 years that I've heard you talk about a project in terms of legacy rather than profit margins." Vincent realized Marcus was right. For 3 decades, he'd approached every project with the question, "What will this make me?" Now he found himself asking, "What will this give to others?" As they prepared to leave the office, Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Darnell, this is Father Morrison. Grace tells me you're ready to come home. The congregation and I have been waiting for you. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. We have much to discuss, and Catherine left something for you. It's time." Vincent stared at the message, feeling 30 years of exile coming to an end. Tomorrow, he would return to the place where his journey with Catherine began, carrying tools of restoration instead of instruments of destruction. That night, Vincent dreamed of stained glass windows casting rainbow light on worshippers' faces, of children's laughter echoing through fellowship halls, of communities gathering in spaces designed to nurture both body and soul. In his dream, Catherine stood beside him in the renovated sanctuary, her hand in his, her eyes bright with the joy of promises kept. When he woke, Vincent found Catherine's cross still clutched in his palm, warm with the heat of hope rekindled. Today, the man who had forgotten how to build beautiful things would begin the most important project of his life, not just restoring a church, but restoring his own capacity for faith, love, and creation. The architect who had lost his way was finally coming home. Vincent arrived at the Millbrook church exactly at 10, carrying a briefcase containing his restoration plans and a heart heavy with 30 years of accumulated regret. Father Morrison was waiting in the parking lot, his weathered face kind but serious as he approached Vincent's car. "Thank you for coming," the priest said simply. "Shall we begin with the cornerstone?" Vincent followed Father Morrison to the side of the building, where construction scaffolding had been erected around a section of foundation wall. Vincent had expected to discuss the broken statue first, but the priest seemed to have other priorities. "The church board voted to show you this," Father Morrison explained, indicating a rectangular stone that had been carefully removed from the foundation. "We discovered it during some routine maintenance work last week. I think the timing was providential." The cornerstone bore an inscription Vincent had never seen: "Laid in faith, 1892, renewed in love, 1995. But it was what lay behind the stone that stopped Vincent's breathing, a time capsule containing letters, photographs, and documents from the church's founding families. Father Morrison reached into the cavity and withdrew a waterproof container. The founders left instructions that this should only be opened during major renovations or times of crisis. The church board decided that your return qualified as both. Inside the container, Vincent found dozens of letters written by the church's original builders, expressing their hopes for future generations. But beneath those historical documents was something that shouldn't have existed. A letter in his own handwriting dated 30 years ago. "I don't understand," Vincent said, recognizing his younger self's passionate script. "How is this here?" "Read it," Father Morrison suggested gently. Vincent unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "To whoever finds this, my name is Vincent Darnell, and I am 22 years old. I have just been commissioned to renovate this sacred space, and I want future generations to understand what we're trying to accomplish. This isn't just about expanding the building, it's about expanding hearts. Catherine and I believe that architecture can be a form of prayer, that beautiful spaces call forth the best in human nature. We pledge our gifts to creating something that will serve this community for generations. If I am no longer alive when this is found, I pray that someone will continue this work. Buildings, like faith, are meant to be living things that grow and adapt while honoring their foundations. May whoever reads this understand that every brick, every beam, every window is placed with love for people we will never meet, but whose lives we hope to touch with beauty." Vincent Darnell, architect, believer, servant of sacred space. Vincent's vision blurred as he read his younger self's words. The passionate idealism, the absolute certainty that architecture could change the world, the deep love for Catherine. That infused every sentence. It was like receiving a message from a stranger who happened to share his name. "There's more," Father Morrison said, producing another envelope. "Catherine added this just days before she died." Catherine's letter was shorter, but more devastating. "Vincent, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to the work we started together. I knew you would, even when you couldn't see it yourself. The renovation plans are more than blueprints. They're a map back to the man I fell in love with, the architect who understood that buildings are promises we make to future generations. Don't let my death be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of your return to beauty. The community needs what you have to give, and you need the healing that comes from creating rather than destroying. Come home, my love. Come home to yourself. Catherine." Vincent sank to his knees in the dirt beside the cornerstone, overcome by the weight of promises he'd forgotten he'd made. For 30 years, he'd convinced himself that Catherine's death had released him from their shared commitments. But here was proof that she had never stopped believing in their original vision. "She visited me 3 times during her final month," Father Morrison said quietly. "Each time she asked about you, about whether you were still designing, still creating. When I told her you'd stop taking commissions, she just smiled and said, 'He'll be back. When the grief passes, he'll remember what he was born to do.'" Vincent looked up at the priest through tear-blurred eyes. "I destroyed your statue. I came here drunk and angry and vandalized your sacred space. Why would you welcome me back?" Father Morrison helped Vincent to his feet with gentle hands. "Vincent, do you know what we did with the pieces of the statue?" Vincent shook his head. "We collected every fragment and created a shrine in the sanctuary, not as a monument to destruction, but as a testimony to the possibility of restoration. Some things become more beautiful when they're broken and rebuilt with care." Father Morrison led Vincent into the church, where the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows painted the walls in jeweled colors. In a side chapel, Vincent saw something that took his breath away: the shattered pieces of the Virgin Mary statue arranged on a table surrounded by flowers and candles. But these weren't just random fragments. Someone had begun the delicate work of restoration, carefully cataloguing each piece and planning how they might be reassembled. Small cards beside each fragment bore names and prayers from congregation members. "The community has been praying over these pieces," Father Morrison explained, "asking for guidance about how to restore not just the statue, but the healing it represents. Several people have volunteered to help with the restoration work." Vincent approached the table reverently, recognizing pieces he had broken in his rage. The Virgin's face, cracked but still serene, her outstretched hands, chipped but still welcoming, her flowing robes, shattered but still graceful. "There's an art form from Japan called kintsugi," Vincent said quietly, touching one of the larger fragments. "When pottery is broken, they repair it with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty rather than trying to hide them. The philosophy is that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to disguise." "That sounds like a perfect metaphor for redemption," Father Morrison observed. "Perhaps this statue was meant to be broken so it could be made more beautiful in its restoration." Vincent studied the fragments with an architect's eye and a penitent's. "Art. I can restore this, not just repair it, but recreate it with golden veins that tell the story of its breaking and healing. It will be more beautiful than it was before." "And the renovation?" Father Morrison asked. "Catherine left the original plans with us. She said you'd need them when you were ready to finish what you started." Vincent opened his briefcase and spread his updated renovation plans beside the original blueprints Catherine had preserved. "I want to honor the original vision while incorporating everything I've learned in 30 years. This community deserves a space that serves all its needs while preserving its sacred character." Father Morrison studied the plans with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary, Vincent. You found ways to expand our capacity without losing our intimacy, to modernize our facilities without sacrificing our character. It's what Catherine and I always envisioned, a place where community can flourish, where people can find healing and hope and connection. I want to create spaces where broken things can be made beautiful again." As they talked, Vincent felt something fundamental shifting in his chest. The weight of 30 years' anger was being replaced by the lightness of purpose rediscovered. He was no longer the man who destroyed beautiful things. He was remembering how to create them. The Cornerstone time capsule had revealed more than historical artifacts. It had revealed the truth about who Vincent really was. Beneath all the years of grief and rage, he was still the young architect who believed in beauty, still the man who wanted to serve something greater than himself, still the husband who had made promises to Catherine that transcended death itself. Tomorrow, he would begin the work of restoration, not just of a statue and a building, but of his own broken and beautiful soul. Vincent spent the sleepless night before groundbreaking wrestling with decades of suppressed grief and newfound purpose. In his hotel room, he spread Catherine's Bible across the small desk and opened it to pages marked with her careful annotations. Her highlighted passages seemed to speak directly to his situation, verses about prodigal sons, second chances, and God's patience with the lost. Beside Luke 15:20, Catherine had written in the margin, "He will come back to you. I know it in my heart." The words were clearly meant for Vincent, a prayer written during her illness when she could see him hardening against the world that was taking her away. Other passages bore similar notes of faith in his eventual redemption. Beside Psalm 51:10, she had written, "Vincent needs a clean heart more than he needs answers." Next to Romans 8:28, her handwriting declared, "Even this will work for good somehow." Vincent traced her words with his finger, marveling at the depth of faith required to believe in his healing while watching her own body fail. Catherine had died, trusting that his anger was temporary, that his gifts would eventually overcome his grief, that love was stronger than loss. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Vincent dressed carefully in work clothes instead of his usual business attire. Today marked the beginning of something entirely new, not just a construction project, but a reconstruction of his own identity. He was no longer Vincent Darnell, the destroyer. He was returning to Vincent Darnell, the creator. At the church, he found an unexpected crowd gathering. Word had spread throughout the small community that the man who had vandalized their statue was returning to restore it. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, but Vincent detected no hatred or desire for revenge. Father Morrison appeared at his side. "Are you ready for this?" Vincent looked at the crowd, at the broken statue pieces arranged on tables, at the architectural plans that represented 30 years of deferred dreams. "I've been ready for 30 years. I just forgot how to remember it." Grace arrived as Vincent was organizing his tools. She approached hesitantly, as if unsure whether their recent conversations had truly healed the distance between them. "Dad, I brought something I thought you might want." She held out a small wooden box Vincent recognized immediately. Catherine's jewelry chest, the one he had packed away after her funeral and never opened. "There are things in here you might need today," Grace said softly. Inside, Vincent found Catherine's wedding ring, the one that matched the one he carried. But more importantly, he found small mementos from their life together. The compass he had given her for their first anniversary, inscribed with, "So you'll always find your way home to me." A small photo of them standing in the Millbrook sanctuary during their wedding, and a folded piece of paper with her final architectural sketches for the church garden. "She drew these during her last week in the hospital," Grace explained. "She said the church needed a healing garden where people could find peace during difficult times." Vincent studied Catherine's sketches through blurred vision. Even facing death, she had been thinking about creating beauty for others. Her garden design showed thoughtful placement of meditation benches, healing herbs, and memorial spaces where families could remember loved ones. "We'll build this too," Vincent promised, exactly as she envisioned it. The restoration work began with the delicate task of cleaning each fragment of the shattered statue. Vincent worked methodically, treating every piece as sacred. Community members volunteered to help, and Vincent found himself surrounded by people whose names he was learning for the first time. Mrs. Patterson, whose grandson had been baptized in the church, carefully sorted smaller fragments. Tom Brady, the local mason, offered expertise about marble restoration techniques. Even teenagers from the youth group participated, asking Vincent to explain his process as he worked. As the day progressed, Vincent realized something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't just statue restoration, it was community restoration. The act of collective creation was healing wounds he hadn't even known existed. "Mr. Darnell," called a voice behind him. Vincent turned to see an elderly woman approaching with a plate of sandwiches. "I'm Mrs. Kowalski, Mary Kowalski. My family donated the original statue." Vincent's hands stopped working. This was the woman whose family memorial he had destroyed in his drunken rage. "Mrs. Kowalski, I'm so sorry. I had no right to damage something so meaningful to your family." The elderly woman smiled with surprising warmth. "Mr. Darnell, that statue honored my brother who died in Korea, but you know what would honor him even more? Seeing his memorial bring a community together in forgiveness and restoration. Bobby always believed broken things could be made beautiful." Again, Vincent felt tears threatening as this gracious woman offered him the very forgiveness he had convinced himself he didn't deserve. "Thank you," he whispered. "I promise to restore it with all the skill and love I possess. I know you will," she said simply. "Catherine told me you would, years before you knew it yourself." As afternoon turned to evening, Vincent's phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. His former assistant's voice was excited. "Vincent, you won't believe this. 3 different foundations have contacted me about funding the Millbrook renovation. Word is spreading about what you're doing, and people want to support it. There's also a documentary filmmaker who wants to chronicle the project, and several architectural schools are asking if they can send students to participate." Vincent looked around at the volunteers working beside him, at the statue pieces, being carefully prepared for restoration, at the community that had welcomed him home despite his failures. "Marcus, this isn't about publicity or recognition. This is about keeping promises and serving something greater than ourselves." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's exactly why everyone wants to be part of it. When was the last time you heard about a major construction project motivated purely by love rather than profit?" That evening, as the community gathered for a simple dinner in the church fellowship hall, Vincent found himself surrounded by conversations he hadn't participated in for decades. People talked about their families, their hopes for the renovation, their memories of Catherine's kindness during her illness. Father Morrison stood to address the group. 30 years ago, Vincent Darnell promised to help us create something beautiful. Today, he began fulfilling that promise, but more than that, he reminded us that redemption is always possible, that broken things can be restored, and that communities are built one act of grace at a time. The applause was gentle but sustained, and Vincent felt something he hadn't experienced since Catherine's death, the sense of belonging to something larger than his own grief. As people began to leave, Grace approached her father. "Dad, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant 3 months along." 3. Vincent stared at his daughter, processing news that changed everything. "Grace, that's wonderful. Does this mean—" "It means your grandchild is going to grow up knowing the grandfather Mom always believed you could be. The one who builds beautiful things and believes in second chances." Vincent held his daughter close, feeling the weight and joy of new life, new purpose, new possibilities. His grandchild would be born into a world where their grandfather was known for creation rather than destruction, for restoration rather than demolition. That night, in his hotel room, Vincent opened Catherine's Bible one final time before beginning the most important project of his life. On the last page she had marked, he found her final note to him. "Vincent, when you read this, it means you've remembered who you were always meant to be. Build something beautiful, my love. Build it for all of us." Tomorrow the real work would begin. Vincent and Grace arrived at the church during the evening service, 36 hours after the statue incident that had changed everything. The community had created a shrine from the broken pieces, each fragment carefully arranged on white linen and surrounded by flickering candles. Vincent hesitated at the threshold, feeling unworthy to enter the sacred space he had violated. His daughter took his hand, leading him to Catherine's favorite pew in the 3rd row, where warm light from the stained glass windows painted rainbow patterns on the worn wooden seats. The congregation noticed their arrival, but continued worship without disruption. Father Morrison's sermon focused on the parable of the lost son returning home, and Vincent felt every word directed at his heart. "Sometimes we have to travel far from home to understand what home really means," the priest said, his gentle voice carrying across the sanctuary. "Sometimes we have to break beautiful things before we remember how to create them." Vincent knelt in the pew where Catherine had prayed during her illness. Overwhelmed by grace he didn't understand. This community had every right to reject him, to demand justice for his vandalism, to protect themselves from the man who had tried to destroy their sacred space. Instead, they had created beauty from his destruction. The shrine of statue fragments had become something extraordinary. Each piece was labeled with prayers of forgiveness and healing written by congregation members. Vincent saw his own name on several prayer cards among the marble fragments, people asking God to heal the broken man who had broken their memorial. During the prayer time, an elderly woman approached their pew. Vincent recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, whose family had attended the church for 4 generations. "Mr. Darnell," she whispered, holding out a faded photograph. "This is your wedding day, isn't it? Catherine gave me this picture years ago. She said someday I might need to show it to you to help you remember who you used to be." Vincent stared at the photograph, himself and Catherine on their wedding day, standing at the altar of this same church. They looked so young, so hopeful, so certain that love could overcome anything. Catherine's face glowed with happiness, and Vincent's expression showed a man who believed in beauty, in community, in the possibility of creating something lasting and meaningful. "She never stopped talking about you," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Even during her treatments, she would tell us stories about the architect who designed sacred spaces, who understood that buildings were prayers made solid. She said you'd lost your way, but never your gifts." Vincent's vision blurred as he studied the young man in the photograph. That Vincent Darnell had believed in serving something greater than himself, had seen architecture as a calling rather than just a career. Where had that man gone? As the service continued, Vincent felt the presence of everyone he had hurt through 30 years of destroying communities. But he also felt something else, the presence of everyone he could still help by returning to his original calling. Grace squeezed his hand. "Dad, look." She pointed to a corner of the sanctuary where teenagers from the youth group were carefully sketching the damaged statue fragments. They were planning art projects inspired by the restoration theme, turning Vincent's act of destruction into inspiration for creation. "Mum would love this," Grace whispered. "She always said broken things could become more beautiful than they were before." The service concluded with the congregation gathering around the shrine of statue fragments. Father Morrison invited anyone who wished to offer prayers for healing and restoration. Vincent watched as community members approached the broken pieces, some touching them gently, others kneeling in prayer. When the crowd thinned, Vincent finally approached the shrine himself. Up close, he could see the careful attention with which each fragment had been preserved. Even shattered, the Virgin Mary's face retained its expression of compassionate love. Her outstretched hands, though broken, still seemed to welcome all who approached. "I'm sorry," Vincent whispered to the broken statue. "I'm sorry for letting my pain become your destruction." Father Morrison appeared beside him. "Vincent, do you know what the congregation decided to do with these pieces?" Vincent shook his head. "We're going to restore the statue using the Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing the breaks with gold so the cracks become part of the beauty. The restored statue will tell the story of destruction and redemption, of how broken things can be, made more beautiful through careful healing." Vincent knelt among the fragments, seeing them now not as evidence of his failure, but as raw materials for something extraordinary. "I know how to do this restoration. I've studied the technique. If you'll let me, I'd like to rebuild what I destroyed." "The community would be honored to have you lead the restoration," Father Morrison replied. "But Vincent, I need to ask you something. Are you ready to be restored as well as the statue?" Vincent looked around the sanctuary, where he had been. Married, where Catherine had prayed during her illness, where Grace now sat in her mother's favorite pew. This sacred space held all his greatest joys and deepest sorrows. "I don't know how," Vincent admitted. "I've spent 30 years forgetting how to build beautiful things. I've become someone Catherine wouldn't recognize." "Then perhaps," Father Morrison suggested gently, "this restoration project can teach you both arts, how to repair broken statues and how to heal broken hearts." As Vincent knelt among the marble fragments, he felt something fundamental shifting. Inside him, the anger that had sustained him for 3 decades was being replaced by something more powerful: purpose. Tomorrow he would begin the delicate work of restoration, piecing together beauty from destruction, creating something more magnificent than what had existed before. The statue would tell a story of redemption, its golden veins marking not weaknesses, but strengths born from surviving brokenness. Grace joined him beside the shrine, her hand resting on her still small belly where new life was growing. "Dad, your grandchild is going to know you as the man who builds beautiful things, not the one who tears them down." Vincent picked up the largest fragment, the Virgin Mary's serene face, cracked but still radiating peace. In those carved features, he saw Catherine's faith, Grace's forgiveness, and his own potential for redemption. The man who had forgotten how to create was remembering, one broken piece at a time. Vincent stood before the congregation the following morning, his voice breaking with emotion as he prepared to make the most important confession of his life. The sanctuary was packed with community members who had gathered to witness what Father Morrison had called a sacred moment of restoration. "I need to ask your forgiveness," Vincent began, his hands trembling as he held the largest fragment of the statue he had destroyed. Not just for vandalizing your memorial, but for 30 years of destroying the kind of communities Catherine and I once believed in building together. Grace sat in the front pew, her face shining with pride and tears as she watched her father reclaim his identity. Beside her sat Marcus, who had driven down from the city to support his employer's transformation into something he'd never expected. A man motivated by love rather than profit. This statue represents everything I've tried to run from since Catherine died, Vincent continued, holding the Virgin Mary's broken face toward the light streaming through stained glass windows. Faith, community, the belief that beauty can survive tragedy. I destroyed it because I couldn't bear to be reminded of the man I used to be. Mrs. Kowalski stood from her pew in the middle section. Mr. Darnell, my family donated that statue 60 years ago to honor my brother who died in Korea. Do you know what he would say if he could see us today? Vincent shook his head, afraid of the answer. He'd say that broken things becoming more beautiful is exactly why he fought in that war. He believed in second chances, in communities that heal rather than condemn. She approached the altar, her aged hands reaching for the statue fragment Vincent held. May I? Vincent placed the broken marble face in Mrs. Kowalski's hands, watching as she traced the crack lines with surprising tenderness. These breaks don't diminish the statue's beauty, she said, addressing the entire congregation. They give us the opportunity to create something that tells a more complete story about how we fall and how we rise, how we break and how we heal. Father Morrison stepped forward with a small wooden box. Vincent, the congregation has asked me to present you with something. When we collected the statue fragments, we also gathered the pieces of your original renovation plans that were damaged in the rain that night. Some of the papers were torn, but the vision remains intact. Vincent opened the box to find his 30-year-old architectural drawings, water-stained and fragmented, but still showing his passionate vision for the church expansion. The margins were filled with his younger self's notes about creating sacred space for community healing and architecture that serves the soul. We've also taken the liberty of framing this, Father Morrison continued, producing a sheet of paper Vincent had never seen before. It was a petition, signed by every member of the congregation, formally requesting that Vincent Darnell complete the renovation project he had begun 3 decades earlier. You want me to finish it? Vincent asked, stunned by the depth of their faith in his transformation. We've always wanted you to finish it, replied Tom Brady, the local mason. Catherine never let us give up hope that you'd come back to complete what you started. She said the community needed what you had to give, and you needed the healing that comes from creating rather than destroying. Vincent looked around the sanctuary, seeing it now through the eyes of the architect he used to be. The building had good bones, but needed thoughtful expansion to serve the growing community. His original plans would create additional fellowship space, while preserving the intimate character that made the sanctuary special. I propose something different than my original design, Vincent said, studying the renovation plans with 30 years of additional experience. Instead of just expanding the building, let's create a campus that serves the whole community. Fellowship halls for gatherings, classrooms for education, even affordable housing for elderly community members. Marcus stepped forward, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Vincent, I've been working on updated drawings based on our conversations. May I? Vincent nodded, and Marcus connected his laptop to the church's projection system. Modern architectural renderings appeared on the sanctuary wall, showing how Vincent's original vision could be enhanced with contemporary techniques and community needs. This design preserves every original element while adding spaces for childcare, community meals, grief counseling, and even a small medical clinic, Marcus explained. It's not just church expansion, it's community transformation. The congregation murmured with excitement as they saw their dreams visualized in architectural form. Vincent watched their faces light up as they recognized how the renovation could serve families, support elderly members, and provide gathering spaces for the entire community. "There's one more element," Vincent said, approaching the altar where the statue fragments were displayed. "The restored statue will stand at the center of a meditation garden designed by Catherine during her final week. She sketched plans for healing spaces where people could find peace during difficult times." Vincent pulled Catherine's garden sketches from his briefcase, spreading them beside the architectural plans. Even facing death, she had been dreaming of beauty that would serve others. "The statue will be restored using kintsugi techniques, the cracks filled with gold to make the breaks part of the beauty rather than hiding them. It will stand in Catherine's garden as a reminder that broken things can become more beautiful than they were before." Father Morrison placed his hand on Vincent's shoulder. "Vincent, are you prepared to make the commitment this project requires? It will take years to complete, and it will require you to remain part of this community throughout the construction." Vincent looked at Grace, at the congregation that had forgiven his destruction, at the architectural plans that represented everything he and Catherine had once dreamed of creating together. "Father Morrison, 30 years ago, I made promises to this community and to Catherine about building beautiful things. I broke those promises when grief made me forget who I was meant to be. I'd like the chance to keep them now." The congregation erupted in applause. But Vincent— 6 months later, construction was nearing completion on the Millbrook Community Church renovation, and Vincent Darnell worked alongside volunteers with dirt under his fingernails and joy in his heart. The memorial garden bloomed where the statue had once stood in pieces, and the restored Virgin Mary gleamed with golden veins that told the story of brokenness transformed into beauty. Each golden crack in the statue caught the morning light, creating patterns more intricate and meaningful than the original unblemished marble. Visitors often stopped to trace the golden lines with their fingers, understanding instinctively that this damaged and restored beauty spoke more profoundly about hope than perfection ever could. Vincent's relationship with Grace had been fully healed through their shared purpose. She visited the construction site weekly, her pregnancy now visible as she planned her wedding to James, a young teacher from the community who had won Vincent's approval by understanding that marriage was about building something beautiful together. "Dad," Grace said one morning as they stood in the completed sanctuary, "I've been thinking about names for the baby. If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Catherine. And if it's a boy, Vincent." Vincent's throat tightened with emotion. "Are you sure? I spent so many years being someone she wouldn't recognize. But you're not that person anymore. You're the grandfather I want my children to know, the one who builds beautiful things and believes in second chances." Vincent had transformed his business from Darnell Development into Darnell Restoration, specializing in preserving and enhancing community landmarks rather than destroying them. The Millbrook project had attracted attention from historical societies and architectural schools, bringing a steady stream of meaningful work. Marcus had become his full partner in the new venture, and together they designed projects that served communities instead of exploiting them. Their portfolio included renovated libraries, restored schools, and adaptive reuse projects that honored the past while serving present needs. Father Morrison visited the construction site daily, often finding Vincent in the early morning hours. Before the volunteers arrived, they had developed a friendship based on shared understanding of loss, redemption, and the patience required for both. "Vincent," the priest said one morning as they watched the sunrise paint the stained glass windows in jeweled colors, "I need to tell you something. Catherine visited me 3 days before she died and made me promise to give you this when the renovation was complete." He handed Vincent a sealed envelope marked "For Vincent, when the beautiful things return." Inside, Vincent found Catherine's final letter to him. "My dearest Vincent, if you're reading this, it means you've remembered. who you were always meant to be. I never doubted you would, even when you doubted yourself. The man who designed our church renovation, who held our daughter like she was made of starlight, who cried at our wedding because he was so grateful for love. That man was always there, waiting under all the grief and anger. I know you think my death was a failure of faith, but I've never seen it that way. My illness taught me that love is stronger than loss, that beauty survives tragedy, that the gifts we're given are meant to be shared even when, especially when, life breaks our hearts. Build beautiful things, Vincent. Build them for the communities that need healing, for the people who have forgotten that grace is possible, for the grandchildren we won't meet together, but who will inherit the world you help create. I'll be watching from wherever love goes when bodies fail, proud beyond words of the man you've become again. Until we meet again, in whatever beautiful place awaits us, know that you were the greatest gift of my life, and our love was the most beautiful thing we ever built together. Forever yours, Catherine. Vincent read the letter sitting in Catherine's favorite pew, surrounded by the sanctuary they had dreamed of renovating 30 years earlier. Tears of grief and gratitude mingled as he felt Catherine's presence, not as a loss to be mourned, but as a love to be honored through the work that remained. The renovation was completed on a Sunday morning in October, exactly 1 year after Vincent had destroyed the statue in his drunken rage. The dedication service drew hundreds of people from surrounding communities, all of whom had heard the story of the man who returned to rebuild what he had broken. Vincent stood before the completed memorial garden, where the restored statue gleamed with its golden veins, and Catherine's healing plants bloomed in carefully designed patterns. The bell tower chimed the hour as family and friends gathered to witness not just the completion of a building project, but the restoration of a man's soul. When I destroyed that statue 6 months ago, Vincent addressed the crowd, I thought I was destroying something that represented faith I could no longer feel. What I discovered is that some things become more beautiful when they're broken and rebuilt with love. He turned to face the golden-veined statue, its expression serene and welcoming despite, or perhaps because of, the cracks that marked its history. This memorial now tells a more complete story about hope. It shows that brokenness doesn't disqualify us from beauty, and that the most meaningful restoration happens not when we hide our damage, but when we let love fill the cracks with something precious. Grace stood beside her father, her hand resting on her rounded belly where new life grew. Vincent placed his hand over hers, feeling his grandchild move beneath their joined palms. My grandchild will grow up knowing that broken things can be made more beautiful than they were before, Vincent said, his voice carrying across the garden to the crowd of witnesses. And that the most sacred spaces aren't those that have never known damage, but those that have been lovingly restored by communities who refuse to give up on beauty. As the service concluded, Vincent remained in the garden, surrounded by the golden light of sunset filtering through Catherine's carefully planned landscaping. Young couples asked him to design their wedding venues. Community leaders inquired about restoration projects. Architecture students requested internships with his firm. The man who had spent 30 years destroying beautiful places was now known for creating them. His reputation had been rebuilt along with the statue, golden veins of redemption marking every crack where bitterness had once lived. That evening, Vincent sat alone in the completed sanctuary, holding Catherine's Bible open to her favorite verse. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, to those who have been called according to his purpose. Vincent finally understood. Even his darkest moment, the drunken destruction of the statue, had been worked into something good. His breaking had led to a more beautiful restoration. His community's healing had led to his own, and his return to faith had created spaces where other broken people could find hope. In the quiet sanctuary, surrounded by architecture that honored both past and future, Vincent whispered his gratitude for a love that had proven stronger than loss, a community that had chosen forgiveness over condemnation, and a calling that had waited patiently through 30 years of exile for his return. The man who had forgotten how to build beautiful things had finally come home to himself, and the world was more beautiful because of it.